And welcome back to California with Todd Wood. And our guest is William Ramsey. And we're here for 7 questions with Todd Wood, the new little kind of mini series that we're doing here with California. And that's 7 questions for William Ramsey on the West Memphis 3. Todd?
Hey everybody, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Um Tonight we're talking about probably one of the most controversial cases of the 1990s with elements of witchcraft, the occult, child murder, just the worst of the worst. And our guest tonight is William Ramsey, who wrote the book Abomination about the West Memphis Three. And I consider him to be sort of an expert on the case, and I can't wait to ask him a bunch of questions.
Great.
Hey, William, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invites. Glad to be with both of you again, Walter and Todd.
Awesome. Now, William, the murders happened in 1993, the trial in 1994. Would you mind giving us a brief summary of the case for those who may not know about it and, or are new to the subject?
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, 1993, there were 3 young boys went missing in West Memphis. So it's west over the Mississippi River from Memphis, Tennessee. It's a small kind of middle to lower middle class or lower, working class neighborhood across the river. A lot of people doing kind of blue collar type of work. And they disappeared on, I think it was May 3rd, 1993. And they were all 8 years old. They were all kind of Cub Scouts. Some were from broken homes, but they were out kind of in the evening and usually were home for dinner. Didn't happen. They didn't turn up. And so the local families kind of panicked, called the cops, called the police. There was a search. And then the next day, the bodies of the young boys were found in a place that was called Robin Hood Hills. It was known kind of locally as that. And it was a place where teens and people would go play, but it was just outside of the kind of suburban area of West Memphis. They were found dead. All 3 were dead. They were bound in a strange way using shoelaces with their ankles to their wrists. So it's kind of a strange thing. They were found to have injuries. They were submerged with sticks or stakes. So that was kind of a strange element of it. And so it brought on national news. So like these 3 kids were found dead. The local police kind of went into overdrive, the West Memphis police, to try to find and solve the crimes. And they kind of had a rumor there was a local kind of juvenile kind of officer who said, hey, this guy, Damien Eckles, might be a subject. He's, I know him pretty well. He might be up to do something like this. Damien Eckles was 18 at the time and had been in 3 men. This is kind of, some of this information wasn't made public and wasn't known until much later, which is very strange. But Eckles had been, his real name was Michael Hutchison. That's his birth certificate. But he had been in 3 mental institutions, 2 in Arkansas and 1 in Oregon. He had briefly stayed in Oregon with his dad, his father. His parents were divorced. I think his mother's passed away by now. But anyway, so they kind of focused in on him. They went and asked him questions. There's pictures in the police files. A lot of the information from the police files were made public by intrepid researchers who I have to credit for, because it was the basis of them getting these police files and the court records that was formed really the basis, the foundation of my book, really. So their work, and was all put on a place called Callahan 8K, which has gone through different iterations. But a lot of that information is out there. Anyway, they talked to Damien Eckles. So it's written down. They asked him questions about the crimes. They went in. He failed a polygraph, which is in the police records. He said to the police, let me talk to my mom, and then I'll tell you everything. He talked to his mom, and then he didn't tell everything. So he was always kind of a prime suspect after this. His defense attorneys would later say that the police had a pinpoint focus on him, which may be true to a certain degree. Anyway, there was still, the police were looking around. The whole community was in an uproar. And then they went and found another young man within a month. It was June 5th. 1993, they went and got this young guy named Jesse Misskelley. And they went to his house. He was with his dad. They said, we'd like to question you about this death. And they were doing, you can see the court records. They're very voluminous. They kept a lot of the records about who they interviewed, potentialities about a cult, Satan worship. There was questions about that. And we'll get into that later. But anyway, they got Jesse Misskelley. They took him down to the police station with the permission of his father. And he, after some time there, which, you know, Jesse wasn't the brightest bulb in the arsenal of light bulbs, but he confessed. They talked to him. Then they decided to record part of that confession. And it was based upon his confession that he was involved with Damien Eckles and another young man named Jason Baldwin in these deaths. And they were all arrested. So they were all arrested June 5th, 1993. And because Jesse was the one who confessed, they were going to use his confession in court. And he couldn't testify against his two accomplices, Baldwin and Eckles. So they bifurcated the trial. So there were really two different trials that ended up going to trial in 1994. They were found guilty. There was the evidence wasn't great. There wasn't DNA evidence at the time, which will come up into kind of future appellate issues and things like that later on in this case, which is really a saga. It's still going on to this day, believe it or not, 2025. There's still disputations in the public, but we'll get to that. But anyway, 1994, there are people who heard Eckles say in a softball game, there were young girls brought up on the stands, and you can see this in the documentary series called Paradise Lost, which was done by Joe Berlinger and Sinofsky by HBO. And Berlinger is still around. He's still making documentaries for what's that? What's the big one? The big streaming service. Anyway, he's still out there. Berlinger's still out there. Sinofsky's passed away from a liver ailment. But anyway, this young girls basically said that they heard Eckles say at a baseball field, I killed the 3 boys and I'm going to kill 2 more. And so they put that up on stand. They actually put Eckles on stand, asked him questions. And they asked him, it was an interesting question. They asked him about Aleister Crowley, which is really how I clicked my interest in the case. And it kind of coincides with my interest because I published a book in 2010 called Prophet of Evil about Aleister Crowley. It's really a biography about Crowley. So it was after I published that, I had come across this because they were released in August of 2011. It's really an incredible story just in itself, really objectively. But they asked him a question about Aleister Crowley because after he'd been arrested, there was elements of like accusations that Eckles was heavily involved in the occult.
Right.
And a lot of that information came out later. Actually, he's proven it actually in his actual involvement in the occult presently because he publishes books and teaches people and stuff like that. So we can get to that later. But they were asking him questions online. He was writing in a secret alphabet. And he had written in kind of a secret alphabet the names of Aleister Crowley, his name, and Jason Baldwin. It's actually in the court documents, so you can see that. So they're asking about Aleister Crowley. And the prosecutor who was prosecuting, I think his name was Price, had a copy, or at least a photographed photocopy of Aleister Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice on the prosecutor's desk. So they really kind of keyed into that element of this case. And then when you look at the court files too, they're incredible because some of the stuff didn't make it into court, but there's some of the statements and testimony confirms all the stuff of the occultism. One is Alvin Clem Bly, who said that Eckles was answering to or influenced by a guy they named Lucifer, who they never found out who his real name was. So that's kind of like one of the mysteries of the case, amongst other mysteries. Anyway, the jury see all the evidence. They see Eckles testify. He admits in the court that some of the information he had wasn't from the paper, that he had information that wasn't from the newspaper. So that's kind of self-condemning. Anyway, they convict him of the killings of the 3 young boys, 2 separate trials, 24 jurors, unanimous. And Baldwin and Misskelley get sentenced to life in prison, and Damien Eckles gets the death penalty. So he goes to death row in Arkansas. And at the time, during these court cases in 1994, Berlinger and Sarnofsky are there recording this, right, for an HBO documentary that came out, Paradise Lost. I mentioned that. So this comes out in 1996, and it's kind of damning. Like, it shows Eckles. He kind of calls himself the West Memphis Boogeyman. People will remember me forever. And then I guess HBO seeks to capitalize on this kind of infamy, and they do 2 more documentaries. In the second documentary, they allow Baldwin and Eckles to kind of lay the blame at one of the stepfathers. And so this starts off this kind of public PR thing that involves a lot of Hollywood celebrities that chose to portray these guys as really kind of unjustly convicted of these crimes, and that they're looking for somebody else. And it takes off in Los Angeles, and these celebrities are really something else. Johnny Depp, Henry Rollins, Dixie Chicks, Margaret Cho, who's like a Korean comedian. I don't know what happened to her career. Metallica allows the use of some of their music in some kind of like one of these documentaries. So there's a lot of stuff. So it's going out, and then it starts this kind of groundswell that they start raising money. Eckles is always professing that he's innocent on death row, and they are able to get a PR agent from New York, and really one of the best appellate attorneys, Dennis Reardon, out of San Francisco. Actually, I live from Northern California. So after I wrote the book, I was in San Francisco. I walked right by like one of his associates who worked on the case without saying anything. It's kind of a funny moment near kind of the civic center of San Francisco. Anyway, so Dennis Reardon had worked on Barry Bonds' case. I don't know if you remember that, but Barry Bonds was kind of was indicted for using roids, right? And his head grew like 3 inches or something crazy like that. But he got off with a slap on the wrist. I think a misdemeanor, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so Reardon did a really good job. They put pressure, public pressure. PR was part of it. Like some of the court documents, some of the documents and correspondence that was found later indicated that these guys, part of their stuff was a PR element, right? So they were going to fight out the battle in the court of public opinion, as they say. And they really did. And I think at a certain point, most people, they actually were able to change the opinion of the public into thinking that these guys were railroaded and somebody else did it. And there was all these other potential other kind of criminal. There were 2 stepfathers. They actually changed from one stepfather to another. One of the stepfathers has passed away. But they also had this guy on the night of the murders. This is like in the police records. He's known as the Bojangles Man, who showed up at a nearby restaurant near the crime scene and went in the bathroom and supposedly was covered with mud and excrement and blood and locked himself in the bathroom. Like a very strange event to occur when there's a really bloody crime scene. Like the genitals of one of the boys was sleeved, is what one of the people called it in court, which is they cut the skin off it, which was never found. And anyway, so this Bojangles guy is a potential other criminal who could have been caught. And I think some of the evidence was lost. The police went and scraped some of this material from the bathroom and then subsequently lost it. But there were strange events that happened on the night of that case, which leads me to believe, in my opinion, that others were involved. And Miss Kelly just fingered 2 other people for some reason, possibly as the ringleaders or something like that. So anyway, so this groundswell, and according to and they actually enlisted or were able to get the assistant of famed mind, what do they call it? Mind investigator John Douglas from the FBI. And John Douglas is, and I've written a document on this, or an article about John Douglas, because he actually became involved in the case. He wasn't an objective kind of an analyst. He actually said stuff that actually contradicted the facts of the court record, which is really incredible. So he ignored actual facts that were in the court record, that were in trial as well. Like he actually wrote, if I remember correctly, I have to be careful with my words, but I think he wrote, I saw nothing indicative from these perps that would indicate violence, when inside the documents that were in these exhibits and things like that showed up later, which he either conveniently ignored or didn't know of. Eckles was threatening to kill people, showing up. There were pigs' heads. They were stomping on dogs, just all blood drinking, just crazy stuff like that. And so John Douglas, actually, one of the great mysteries of this case, which confused the public and confused me actually, when I was first kind of researching the case in 2012, there was a lot of head scratching because there were so many different parts. And the majority of the people believe they were innocent, still do to this day. Actually, Eckles was on the Tim Pool broadcast, I think last year, 2024, for 2 hours and just rolled Pool like a clown, like really just, Pool had no idea the case. Subsequently, I found out later the person who was his scheduler was a fan of Eckles and read all his books. And she was the one who put him on the show, which you can't even believe. I forgot he ended up firing all his employees and selling his company. I think Pools. That's a whole nother show. Anyway, it was interesting to watch it because you see the sympathy and like targeting. There's a kind of an infamous interview with the 3 or 2 of the guys on Piers Morgan, who also had a very sympathetic view. But anyway, so there's a lot of head scratching trying to figure it out. But getting back to John Douglas, he actually, because of his influence and his opinions, he actually turned a couple of the parents of the murdered children into either thinking through money or something like that, that these actually didn't have the right murder victims, when these guys are still guilty at law, by the way. They were found guilty in 1994, and they actually, with the best attorneys, like they had Dennis, like this guy, Dennis Reardon, was like a super lawyer. But they signed on the dotted line in August of 2011 that the state had enough evidence to convict them of first-degree murder. So it's really an incredible case. So they're actually, strangely, in the criminal law, which is not believable, people who've been convicted twice. Like, it's unbelievable, the same crime. And you can see those documents online, and people take the effort to actually go online. They actually had an appeal to the Supreme Court of Arkansas, and that appeal failed too. So they were really kind of behind a rock and a hard place. But I think what happened is the prosecutor who worked on the case and the judge, they moved on. They literally, like, one guy retired, if I remember, and there was a new judge. His name was Laser. So it wasn't the same judge who saw the original case. And then they had a new DA who came in. And I think the pressure, they just said, I don't want to retry this because I'm going to look bad. There's a lot of politics involved, I think. And so I think that's why they let them plead guilty and get out of jail. So they walked out of jail with the kind of statement, we're going to find the real killers. And it's been 14 years and no credible alternate killers. There's been a lot of talk about DNA, like what's the DNA evidence, and they're publicizing. And these journalists are so stupid and irresponsible. They actually republish this stuff thinking it's credible. And it's just like, this has already been done over. And they're blaming like the evidence locker for not keeping the evidence straight and all this stuff. Well, there was enough evidence to convict them, and actually they applied for a writ of, their attorneys applied for a writ of certiorari, which is to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court didn't want to hear it. There wasn't anything there for them to hear. So that's kind of like the long overview, the change and everything. And then Eckles is claiming, like, I've been railroaded, and this was kind of a tunnel vision to get me and all this stuff. And then he gets out and he writes Life After Death, becomes a bestseller. He goes on a book tour, and then he goes back and starts practice and really posting. He ends up in Salem. Like, he identifies as Salem, Massachusetts, and the witch hunts because he calls it a witch hunt. But I think the guy's a witch. Like, there's stuff on his Instagram. He's got wands and stuff and crystals, and he practices Reiki and energy healing. And he's tattooed himself with the Theban alphabet, which is also known as the witch's alphabet, and also the John D. Enochian alphabet. Like, these are very specific things to somebody who's a ceremonial magician, which I think he admits. He also was a member of the OTO. So Crowley is a common theme, which is kind of like why I kind of keyed into this, because I knew a lot about Crowley. And I kind of saw Crowley as kind of a dead letter figure. And I was totally wrong. Like, people are still into Crowley, including Eckles. And 9/11 was full of Crowley's kind of numerology. But anyway, he was part of this OTO chapter. According to the OTO, he has a library called the Damien Eckles Library at the OTO. They call it an oasis in Arkansas. And he refers to himself as a Thelemite, which is a term very specific to Crowleyites. And there's an article in like one of the OTO journals called SK 931, which was Damien Eckles' number in jail when he was in death row. So I've done a ton of videos and stuff like that. A lot of them were censored off of YouTube. I'm trying to repost them and stuff like that. But I really kind of, this book was, to wrap it up. This book is like the culmination of all that research. Put out in 2012. They tried to get me sued on Amazon. They got it taken down on Amazon, and Amazon, to their credit, put it back up to redistribute it. I don't know what the attorneys at Amazon did. Also, when I published it, the book made the website of the Supreme Court of the state of Arkansas. So it's actually pretty cool. So I have a screen capture. I'll try to find it and repost it. But I was there with, I was on this like recommended book list by the Supreme Court of Arkansas. So I think they appreciated kind of the work and the labor I did to kind of get this out, because I was appalled. And when I put it out, it's very unpopular. Like this view, and also they always, the Satanists always use there are Satanists out there, by the way. They always use this term satanic panic. Like, why are you panicking? And they also like try to put you in the kind of box of conservative Christian or evangelical. I was raised Catholic, so I don't know how that applies. And they also say they also interpret you as a flyover kind of hillbilly. Like, I'm in California. I'm in a coast. I get out of my apartment, I look at the ocean. Like, I'm so far coastal. So there's all these kind of deliberate, I think, misinformation and kind of PR stuff. And their PR guy came after me too. So it's been an interesting ride. I fought a lot of battles that really haven't been publicized yet.
Right. That's really interesting. So like you said in the first question, all this stuff was happening during what they call the Satanic Panic. Can you briefly kind of go into what your view of the Satanic Panic is before we move into sort of the more in-depth occult side of what Damien Eckles' belief system is and how he functions?
Sure. Satanic Panic kind of grew up during this kind of environment of the child abuse scandals. McMartin, I think there was one in Florida. There was one they were all over the country, actually. And they were claimed a witch hunt, and people were panicking because of the Satanism that's involved. So this term became kind of a panic. And there were kind of abuses. They were seen as panic, and they were seen actually in the context of the Salem witch trials in the 16th century, there's more nuanced witch trials, things going on in that as well. But anyway, there was actual real Satanism and stuff taking place. The allegations in McMartin, some of them have been verified, but this guy Fuster out of Florida was definitely a Satanist and occultist and doing horrible stuff like trauma-based mind control. And same thing has been found at the Finders cult. Like, these are all verified stuff. So the Satanic Panic was a kind of I would term it as a loaded term, much like conspiracy theorists or things like that, that kind of tag somebody as hysterical or not based in facts or sound logic or reason, and that you shouldn't be afraid. And actually the opposite is, I think that Satanism is that kind of gives you that mens rea to do evil things,
right?
Because you're ignoring the morality. You're more important. Like Crowley, you're at the center of the universe, right? No man is God, and that's kind of a common theme in this. Is like you're above the law too. So I think people should be concerned about Satanism and Satanists in that mentality, because they're capable of greater abuses and flat out crimes than maybe somebody who tries to abide by, Buddhism or just some thoughtful, rules of behavior. So I think that when people say Satanic Panic, and I actually have a full chapter in my book kind of addressing Satanic Panic, and it's called Satanic Killers. And it goes into people who are influenced by Satanism who kill people. It's like a 20-page chapter. I mean, so these are things in the past you can go through. There's so many, like the Beasts of Satan from Italy, the Ripper Crew in Chicago, guy who literally worked for Gacy. You can just go on. There was another guy, I think, what was it? Lyric Casso in Long Beach. I mean, the satanic ritual abuse has already been confirmed. Like that, you have to just look into it and you'll be confirmed that this, I don't think it's that common, but people do engage in kind of satanic rituals. So anyway, I'm against that. It's against my personal views.
Right. Me too. Okay, so I like you mentioned before, Damien Eckles was a Crowleyite, and I guess he belonged to the OTO. Is that correct? And what is the OTO?
So the OTO, yeah. So these are kind of older orders that existed back then. It's kind of like the Golden Dawn. The OTO was known as a German kind of occult order, and very similar. Grew up kind of around Crowley when Crowley was starting off in his occult kind of career, if you will, in the late 19th century. So the OTO stands for Ordo Templi Orientis. And it has kind of a more kind of Middle European or German kind of view. But a lot of the things overlapped. And Crowley eventually became its head. So people think that Crowley started the OTO. That's not correct. But he did have contact with a lot of fellow occultists. And they actually came out and visited him and made him a member. The members of the OTO came to England and visited Crowley and said, "You're stealing our ideas," because Crowley was starting to was sexualizing his rituals, and OTO was doing it at the same time. So they claimed that Crowley had stolen. He's like, "I'm not." But then they made him kind of the head of the English OTO. They like to bestow very flowery kind of titles and things like that. So I think he became like the Epopt of Ionia or something like that. But anyway, so the OTO kind of grew up. And in 1925, Crowley became its head. He went to Germany and actually was voted in after some of the founding members passed away. Royce was one of the guys also involved in Intel. And there's a lot of OTO members around the circle of the Nazis, the early Nazis and the Thule Society. So there's this fellow traveler element around there, which is kind of disturbing. Crowley, for people who don't know, was in Germany during the Weimar Republic. He's in very interesting places at interesting times in 20th century history. But one of the interesting things was like as Hitler's coming to power in 32 or 33, he's in Germany for that time as a head of the OTO. And so anyway, so the OTO is a secret society, different levels, initiations, things like that. But when Crowley becomes the head of the OTO, he integrates a lot of his ideas into it. So he had integrated his ideas of Thelema, the Book of the Law, which he supposedly received in 1904, and all this stuff. So the OTO kind of takes off from that. And so then the OTO, after Crowley dies in 1947, he anoints a head. Supposedly the head is a guy by the name of McMurtry, and there's a dispute, and they have more lawsuits. Crowley ended up suing some people from the Golden Dawn. There was a lawsuit between really his mentor, somebody he emulated, a guy whose public name was McGregor Mathers, and those are court records are actually in the newspaper. You can go to newspapers.com. Anyway, so the OTO fights. McMurtry ends up in Berkeley. Strange friendships, Robert Anton Wilson, Jacques Vallée, things like that. But then the OTO kind of morphs. People want to become members. And what usually turns out, and they actually disperse, so they have a lot of chapters in big urban areas, so, New York, or where there's occultism. New York City, Portland, San Francisco, LA has a big chapter. And the biggest chapter during Crowley's life was the one called the Agape Lodge, run by Jack Parsons in Pasadena, which is a whole nother story, but kind of keeps that pattern. They call it the current, the kind of magical current. So that current kind of goes through Crowley OTO. And it goes to the present. So there's still OTO chapters, OTO members, people getting involved in the OTO. They're always squabbling and fighting with one another. But according to this OTO book, which I can post again if I can find it, they literally refer to Eckles as an OTO member or a Thelemite. And so he was practicing in jail, and people sent him books. So he's known as a reader. I think he's actually an intelligent guy, but he had tons of books. And what happened was when they got out of jail in 2011, they had this, they had a rental garage or whatever, a rental unit where they kept all their stuff. and a guy, I forgot his name, but a guy in Arkansas bought it, and he was in the news. So I reached out to him and did an interview when I worked with Ed, or I worked as kind of a semi-producer with Ed for like 3 years. Ed Opperman of the Opperman Report. We talked to him, so people can see that interview. But it's an interesting kind of piece of this whole saga, because when he bought it, when you go buy these rental units, you don't know what's in there. They kind of tell you, I think there's boxes, but he got all this stuff about Eckles and like interesting writings in Eckles' handwriting, which is a nice way to put it. But there were tons of books on occultism all over the place. So he had all these books on occultism, which shows his interest. He really is a scholar. We actually said on the stand back in '94, one of the prosecutors asked him, "What do you know about the occult?" I can't remember verbatim, but he said, "I know everything about the occult." So he kind of made that bold statement when he was 18 in 1994. So he was reading, and he had kind of like he was an autodidact, is the way you could put it. Somebody who's self-taught, but he didn't seem to have great grades or stick in school. Like, I think he was 18 and a junior or something like that. But yeah, but he knew a lot, enough to impress a lot of people with his knowledge and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's kind of a rough overview of the Ordo Templi Orientis.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, to bring up exhibit, is it exhibit 500 that talks about Eckles' history of mental illness and his history in mental hospitals? What do you think it is about the attraction between the mentally ill and Satanism and the occult?
It's a really good question. So I don't know, though. The reason it got its number, Exhibit 500, it was in his appellate kind of case where they went and got his psych files, psychiatric files, and there were 500 pages. And they showed all this detailed talking, his interviews with psychiatrists and psychologists, and all this stuff. And I think, they had him on a drug called Impramine or something like that. I forgot what it was, but he was on drugs. And a lot of his court, during the original trial, according to my research in 1994, his attorneys didn't know that he was on disability. So his mother was on disability too. So he was taking payments from the government as being disabled. And his like application for disability showed like an interest in LaVey and all this stuff like that. So why these disaffected? I mean, I think why is the people go that route into the occult? Do they, because it promises power? Maybe they feel powerless, so they want power. So this is something to give them that promise. And maybe they want something out of the world they're not getting. Money. It's usually very simple. Money, sex, the permission to do stuff, permissibility, drugs. So maybe they've come from a place of restriction or something, like Crowley did. So I think that for disaffected youth who don't go the Christian route, this is their means to achieve something in the world. And I think that may have been the purpose behind this whole killing in May, which is, I think, on Imbolc. Like, there was kind of a close to a satanic holy night or whatever, was to obtain power, like the supreme ritual or something like that.
Right.
So I think there's something in, and I've done a show with the Secret Son Speaks, whose name I can't remember right now, but he keyed into kind of the druidic aspects of the deaths, the bog element where you submerge the body in the bog and sacrifice it in water. And they found out in two of the deaths later during the medical examination that they had drowned. And during Jesse's confession, a lot of people don't know this, but Jesse didn't just confess in '93 to get them all arrested. When he was convicted, he confessed to the cops who was driving him to jail. Then he was telling his lawyers, "Hey, I did it." Then he confessed on a Bible, and these were recorded. But in one of the recordings, he said something that's very trenchant to me, which is he saw the boys' bodies wriggling like worms in the water. And that's a visual. I just can't think that he could come up with that. Like, that's something he saw. So I think he saw something very dark. And according to my take of those three, he's really the only one with kind of a conscience who felt sad. And there's actually another video of one of Jesse's friends talking to one of the investigators. And he's like, yeah, Jesse was crying. He told me to take his shoes and wash the mud off them. And like, so it sounds like Jesse knew that he was trying to like avoid all this stuff. And he wanted these shoes that were involved in the crime to get lost. And these are kind of within the court files. They're not within the court case, the actual prosecution case. But yeah, so, I mean, to answer your question, I think that's the attraction of the occult in general. Power, and the promises that they give you, like they're worldly promises, right? So you have power over your enemies. You can get what you want through the use of these rituals and things like that. And, a lot of these guys have like daddy issues too. Like there's a lot of like parental hatred while they go into it. So there's a deeper psychology of the attraction to occultism,
right,
that I think is worth looking into.
Well, interestingly enough, I've been looking into the whole Aztec thing. I'll check the Aztec human sacrifice calendar and correlate it with the deaths of the boys and see what kind of human sacrifice was needed for that particular month. The Aztec calendar had 18 months instead of 12, and see if there's any correlation there. I'll get back to you if you like.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I think that there was there was a book that I was reading. Christopher Knowles was his name, Secrets Unspeaks. And you can listen to that on my podcast. You can listen to the interview I did with him, or just really was his research. But yeah, I think that the Druidic thing was kind of interesting because it was known by his parole officer or whatever they called it, that they would, all three of them would walk around. They were walking all the time. They didn't have cars, not a lot of economic resources, but they would walk around with like literal staves, almost like they were play acting as druids. Like,
right. That's I see. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's part of the case. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
So we understand that basically Paradise Lost was a propaganda piece, a PR piece to kind of help the murderers. But from that, I guess, or before that, there's the kind of emergence of a phenomenon that you spoke about before, known as innocence fraud. Would you mind going into innocence fraud for those who don't know, who may be ignorant of like sort of what it is, and so they don't get bamboozled by it or taken for a ride?
Sure. I think I'd like to address the kind of the trilogy, the documentary trilogy. I think that it was a HBO money making, in my opinion, HBO money making scheme to kind of maximize profit, doing a cheap documentary. A lot of people didn't know that a lot of the people in that documentary were actually paid money under contract, like they were celebritized by Hollywood. I do think that it was the people who made the documentary had contempt for Midwesterners. So I think that there was also pictures of like the stars and bars, right? The Confederate flag and things like, they focused in on all this stuff. So they made these guys look, and the judge look like hillbillies and stuff like that, which I think was really discreditable, dishonorable. And I think that was part of the kind of the culture war. So I think that there's an element of there, which is why they had the sympathy for these young kids as opposed to they made the prosecutors look bad, in my opinion, and didn't focus on the facts of the case at all. So really irresponsible. I think that HBO people are contemptible and should be ashamed of themselves. And it's part of this whole growth of this innocence fraud, like you mentioned, that's happening all over the country. And I didn't see, when I first looked at this case, I saw it through the lens of the context of Crowley, because that's what I had been studying pretty intently for a couple of years. So I was seeing it as occultism because nobody was talking about the occultism. Like that wasn't a credible motive for this case. It was just like these guys were railroaded. They were innocent. They wore heavy metal T-shirts, and that's why they were targeted, which is complete nonsense. Because when I grew up around that age, like a quarter of the guys I knew would wear T-shirts of their favorite band, Rush or whatever it was. Anyway, so it was just this bogus kind of PR kind of thing. But anyway, I didn't see it as that. But it's part of this whole movement in the U.S. There's an Innocence Project. There's also other pieces of things like new podcasts and documentaries, Making a Murderer, which supposedly makes this guy literally tortured and was convicted of torturing and killing a woman, make him look like he could be innocent. This is out of like Minnesota or Wisconsin. The guy's guilty as heck. There's also the case of the Serial podcast, which was the number one podcast for a while, that made this Arabic guy, like Arabic descent, I can't remember his name offhand, but made him look innocent for the killing of 8 men. And it's still ongoing. They let him, I mean, it's part of the whole Soros anti-civilizational kind of push, but it's part of this whole thing where all these guys are innocent. They've had massive blowback. The Innocence Project literally put this guy on that got out of jail on Joe Rogan, whose name I can't remember right now. But honestly, within a month of being on Joe Rogan, they arrested him for taking a guy, cutting him up in his apartment and taking him out in a suitcase. So this is innocence fraud blowback, because these guys aren't all innocent. There's a lot of these guys have had really good cases, and they've done a good job. So it's really, to me, part of this is like an assault on the legal system in the United States. They never really address the actual court cases in these public things. They just say they're innocent. There's a huge financial issue in in the context of innocence. These guys who are part of the Innocence Project and things like that, they are not doing it pro bono. If they get some of these guys out and they convince people that they didn't do it, some of these payouts are in 7 or 8 figures. I've done a show on the Central Park 5, this is a new thing on Netflix, which is a name I couldn't remember earlier, but on Netflix, which makes this Central Park 5, which were part of this Wilding thing, which supposedly tried to rape this girl in the park and left her for dead. That they make it look like the cops, and there was like a nasty white prosecutor, and when they see us, implies that they hate us on sight because we're black, right? Well, the reality is I talked to one of the guys who arrested the Central Park 5 and said that they didn't rape them, that they were punks, and that they all had confessed in recorded video recording with their parents. And so but these guys eventually got out of jail, and out of the tax funds of New York City, they got tens of millions of dollars. And I think one of them went on to public office. Like, they got rehabbed, and people believe that they didn't commit the crime, much like Damien Eckles. So something very sinister, actually more sinister, is taking place in the American culture, which is very sick and full of very sick people. Mm-hmm. If you can actually upend the kind of court process without ever addressing the court process or the facts in the court case. And oftentimes they pick and choose what's in the factual record of these court cases, which is incredible. So they ignore certain facts or confessions or things like that, much like Jesse Kelly's confessions. Like, when you talk to the average West Memphis 30 person, they have no idea that Jesse confessed over and over in recorded confessions. Like, he's confessing over and over recorded. Yes, we did it. Yes, we did it. I did it. So innocence fraud is a very important concept, I think, to understand in modern America. And it's part of this kind of Soros prosecutors from hell type of thing that's happening all over these big blue states or blue cities. There's lack of prosecution, letting people out on bail, and really the destruction of American civilization from within. Like, much worse than anything Putin has ever done to us has been done by these prosecutors, who are, a lot of them are getting censured. And it's like probably one of the most sinister assaults on the legal profession without a proper response I've ever seen. I've seen in my lifetime. And there isn't really a cultural pushback on a lot of these people who have a financial interest in getting these people out of jail. It's incredible.
Yeah, you're right. It does sound very sinister.
Adnan Syed was the guy's name out of Baltimore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Considering, I'm not surprised, considering all the stuff that was that's going on in the news right now with the UK doing the cover up of the what was it, a Pakistani gang? The whole,
they call it the Rotherham sex assaults. They had a guy in the House of Commons say that 250,000 women were raped.
My God. Oh,
I didn't say 250. I said 250,000, and the government is in on it. So why are you paying taxes for this garbage?
I
Like, it's
know.
incredible. I mean, here in the California, just within the last 24 hours, they had a huge fire, and the incompetence is off the charts. People lost $5 million houses. Some don't have insurance. The whole
Right.
place is scraped to the ground. And
Oh.
where's the like? There's. I mean, I live nearby, so I can see it. There's almost no like firemen around.
Right.
Where
Well,
are
you
they?
know, Walter and Malia
Fine.
are they live close by too to the fire.
Ooh.
I'm
by the Pacific Palisades,
we live about a couple of hours east.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. We got the wind. We felt the wind.
But I just saw earlier on Facebook that our friend Cameron Pasha, who's been a guest of the show, he got the evacuation order probably about an hour ago. So
Wow.
unfortunately, you know, he lives there by the beach in Santa Monica, adjacent to a house that used to be owned by Marilyn Monroe.
Wow. So he's on the
one of
other
those neighborhoods. Yeah.
I know exactly where he is. He's on the north side of La Cienega.
Yeah.
That's the cutoff point of the evacuation. So he got evacuated last night, and he's getting evacuated tonight as well.
I think he avoided evacuation last night. Maybe he did, but he just in the Facebook I saw just a little while ago, he definitely got the evacuation order. So maybe that was from last night. I don't know. Sometimes those things people comment and the actual original post is a little older, but
there's a whole plateau in Pacific Palisades that's gone. Each house worth $5 million. So
that's
it's
what I
just
heard.
like
Yeah.
loss is off the charts, and the school's gone. Their downtown area's gone.
Wow.
It's incredible. It's absolutely. And the head of like the mayor was in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, our California politicians love to do this international outreach when they should just be reaching across their own town and fixing things.
Oh, so disgusting. They're the worst. Total incompetence. Like, wow. Like anybody with shame would just like quit. Yeah. Like, I failed. Mm-hmm. They're disgusting. A lot of them. I mean, Bass, I think she was kind of losing the mayor's election, and then like, whoa, we got some new votes, and now she's mayor. It happens a lot in California, and nobody ever gets busted for it.
Yeah.
Incredible. Same thing happened to Kamala, I think, back in like 2012 with her race for the DA. You could see it on her Wikipedia. She was neck and neck with something, and then all of a sudden, whoa, she got some magical votes, just like Biden in 2020. Like, how do people put up with this nonsense? It's such a joke. They're totally corrupt and disgusting.
They still get their bread in circuses, so they don't care.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah. So you said that Johnny Depp was one of the people advocating for the West Memphis 3. Do you know what it's called when you see a bad Johnny Depp movie?
What is it?
Getting Depp pressed.
Yeah, that's right. Well, see, one of the interesting things about this case is the celebrity endorsements and support, whether right or wrong, and the ignorance of the actual evidence. So for me, I didn't understand like why these people were supporting him after I'd read the court cases. Because once I read the court case, it was obvious to me something else was going on. Mm-hmm. Well, then I didn't know much about Depp. Then I started researching Depp. Then I started researching Rollins. Then I started researching Cho. Then I started researching Eddie Vedder. Right. And it becomes more and more. And Depp, to me, is like a high-level occultist as well.
And you know what? It's so funny that, like, have you noticed, like, he doesn't even talk with his actual voice sometimes? Yeah. Like, he tries to do this sort of New Atlantic accent, like, at least for, like, the Elliott Smith documentary, in which I wholeheartedly believe that Elliott Smith was murdered by River Cuomo's ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, I think
but that's what I believe.
Well, that's my opinion as well.
Yeah.
There were no hesitation marks on his chest. So
right.
A lot of time when people commit suicide, it's a known thing. Like they go, I'm going to do this. And it's just like.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think Johnny Depp, he's an occultist, but at the same time, I think he's either a midwit or just plain right stupid. Just because, you know, he's trying to present himself as sort of eloquent and kind of almost old age aristocratic in a sense, the way he talks. And it just makes me giggle. I can't take him seriously, you know?
all kinds of suspicious stuff about that guy. His like business partner at the what is the place called where River Phoenix died last night. The Viper Room disappeared. River Phoenix dies suspiciously of a drug overdose there.
Right.
Who benefits from these people? There's a lot of competition in Hollywood. A lot of people hate each other. But he and Eckles share a couple tattoos. I don't know if you know that.
Right. The Theban alphabet, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I included that kind of symbolism on the cover, is because that tattoo goes back actually, I think, to the OTO. One known follower of Crowley that a lot of people might know is Kenneth Anger, who has that same kind of motif, who lived with Bobby Bouzoulet, right? Of the Manson family. He has that. You can see that, I think, in my Demon Brother, or the Demon Brother movie that features Bobby Bouzoulet. A lot of researchers in Manson overlooked that fact.
Is that Lucifer Rising? No, it's not.
No, it's a different Invocation of my. He's made a lot of different movies, but one is Invocation of My Demon Brother, which features Bouzoulet in the top hat, in front of the kind of in the building they call the Russian consulate, or the Russian embassy building, which is kind of close to Haight-Ashbury, but on the front of that it says "Do what thou wilt." Right, that's the aphorism or whatever. But anyway, that symbol, that's the Theban alphabet in the circle, and it's shared by him, Peter Jackson, Johnny Depp, and on the inside they have this kind of sigil, right? So for sigil magic, you take the square and you put letters or whatever, and then you write out the word, and then you take the square off, and that sigil's there, and that's supposed to kind of like bring in the spirit world or something to like kind of actualize your thoughts.
William, while you were talking about doing the summary of the case, you were talking about Lucifer and Mr. Bojangles and some of the occult stuff. And it just occurred to me what George said when we were talking to him on your show about Stanley Dean Baker. After he was arrested in he did his Montana sentence, he was, I guess, maybe he either got rearrested or transferred to Arkansas. So that may be a thread that we may need to be pulling for that.
Do you know what year that was?
85 is, I guess, when he supposedly disappeared, but actually just went to Arkansas. I'm guessing. There's not that much on Cav Death.
That's remarkable. Wow.
Yeah, so we need to be pulling that thread right there. Hey, William, will you tell everybody where they can hear your podcast and get your books and just dig into your research?
Yeah, you can get my books on Amazon. All 5 of my books are on Amazon. You can buy them if you want a signed copy from me at William Ramsey Investigates. My podcast is in the top 0.5% of podcasts in the world. I have over 1,300 episodes. It's William Ramsey Investigates. Cover a bunch of different stuff. I have great guests like Todd Wood, one of my most listened to guests. My audience loves all your work. And
thank you.
So, yeah, check it out. So you can check it out. And I recommend people read the book. It's not that clever of a book. It's really, the purpose is to show the actual real facts of what happened, because a lot of people, it's hard to discern between propaganda and actual facts in a lot of stuff. I don't care what the subject is these days. I think the CIA has successfully confused people and made them really give up, like they don't know healthcare facts or facts about politics, even history itself.
It's Plato's cave, my friend.
Yeah, so I think that this book is really an attempt in 2012 to really clarify that and give people an understanding. And there's more to it than just kind of the case I talk about: satanic killers, witches and witch hunts, the history of witchcraft, all this stuff. Eckles is a fan of witchcraft, so he had the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft, and I believe that he was kind of involved in some of these knots, with specific knots as a form of kind of like witchcraft magic. So he might have incorporated all this crazy stuff into this murder, and I think you can kind of see kind of the larger environment. I talk about cause celeb serial killers as well, where these guys in Hollywood take on these people who are criminals who then go on to commit crimes again. So there's a lot of information in there. It's for over 400 pages.
Amazing research from an amazing researcher. Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of KILLIFORNIA. Like and subscribe. And for a bonus episode, go to walterbosley.com. It will be up shortly. See you there.